My father slammed his hand down on the mahogany table so hard that all the crystal glasses rattled. In the sudden, heavy silence that followed, he pointed a finger straight at me and called me a thief. The word hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed-out candle. My fork froze, a piece of honey-glazed ham dangling between my plate and my lips. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Seconds ago, this dining room had been filled with laughter and Christmas music. Now it was tomb silent. I looked at my father, Victor Callahan, 61, the head of one of Savannah's oldest families. I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before, and it wasn't disappointment or frustration. It was pure, calculated fury. He was accusing me of stealing from our own family. He claimed I'd secretly transferred Grandma Eleanor's trust fund into my own name. He said I'd forged documents to claim her historic mansion on Victory Drive. He said I'd been siphoning off money for years while pretending to be broke in a tiny Atlanta apartment. For 4 years I'd been scraping by on instant noodles and borrowed hope. And now my own father was calling me a thief in front of everyone I'd ever loved. In the corner, the Christmas tree lights twinkled, casting red and green shadows across my family's horrified faces. Somewhere in the living room, Bing Crosby crooned about a white Christmas. The smell of roasted turkey and rosemary still hung in the air, mixing with the scent of fresh pine. 30 minutes ago, I'd been standing on the front porch of this house, my childhood home, gathering the courage to ring the bell. The Callahan estate sat on a tree-lined street in the historic district, surrounded by white columns and gray Spanish moss dripping from ancient oaks. Warm light poured from every window, and I could hear the sounds of laughter inside. 3 years. I'd been gone for 3 years, working temp jobs in Atlanta, telling myself I was building an independent life. But the truth was simpler and sadder. As long as I could remember, I'd felt like an outsider in this house. It was easier to leave than to keep fighting for a seat at a table where I clearly didn't belong. But this year, my mother sent me a card, a handwritten note asking me to come home for Christmas. "Let's be a family again," she'd written. I stared at those lines for a week before buying a bus ticket I could barely afford. My mother, Patricia, greeted me at the door with an air kiss that landed somewhere near my left ear. She looked me up and down and told me I looked tired. My sister Colleen arrived a few minutes later, sporting a Mercedes and a designer bag, her husband Derek and their daughter Sophie in tow. Colleen scoffed at the simple dress I'd chosen, the nicest thing I owned, and whispered something to Mother that made them both laugh. But Derek surprised me with a warm hug. When nobody was looking, he leaned in and whispered 2 words that I thought I understood. "Be careful." I didn't get it then. I thought he meant watch out for family drama or old tensions. I had no idea he was warning me about an ambush. Sophie, my 7-year-old niece, ran to me with open arms. "Aunt Meredith, I missed you." That hug, that pure, innocent love from a child, almost made me believe the night would go well. Sitting quietly in a corner chair was Great Aunt Vivian, my grandmother Eleanor's sister. She was the only one who'd visited me in Atlanta, bringing casseroles and gossip, never asking why I'd left. When I walked in, she gave me a look I couldn't read, something between sadness and a warning. Dinner began calmly. My father carved the turkey with ritualistic precision. My mother arranged the side dishes like a general commanding troops. Colleen dominated the conversation, talking about her real estate business and her newly renovated kitchen. Nobody asked about my life, and nobody seemed to notice I was barely speaking. Then Father asked about my little job in Atlanta. His tone made the word little sound like an insult. I explained that I'd been doing administrative temp work, saving what I could. Colleen snorted. "Still saving?" she said. "At your age?" Mother then mentioned Grandma Eleanor, saying how much she would have wanted us all together for the holidays. I saw Great Aunt Vivian's hand tighten around her wine glass until her knuckles turned white. I was wondering why when Sophie, innocent Sophie, looked up from her mashed potatoes and asked a question that made my blood run cold. "Mommy, why did you say Aunt Meredith was in trouble?" Colleen snapped at her. Derek's jaw tightened. My heart sank. "What trouble?" I started to ask, but Father set down his carving knife. He cleared his throat. The room went quiet. He slowly looked around the table, letting the tension build, before turning his gaze directly to me. That was when he slammed his hand on the table. That was when he called me a thief. Now I sat frozen in my chair as Mother stood up. She wore that practiced expression of disappointment she'd used on me 1,000 times whenever I failed to meet some impossible standard. She slowly shook her head. "We have evidence," she said, her voice cool and calm. "We have bank statements, wire transfers, and documents with your signature that you thought we'd never find." Colleen reached under the table and produced a manila folder. She pushed it toward me with a look of triumph. I recognized that look. It was the same one she wore when she successfully framed me for something she'd done as a kid. "Open it," she said. "Take a look and explain yourself." My hands shook as I opened the folder. Inside were bank statements I'd never seen, from accounts I didn't know existed, all with my name on them. There were transfer authorizations where the signature looked like mine but wasn't quite right. The M was off. The way the H connected to the A in Callahan was wrong. Someone had studied my signature and practiced it. In that moment, looking at those forgeries, I recognized exactly whose handwriting it was. I looked up at Colleen. She smiled. Mother spoke again. "We're giving you one last chance, Meredith. Admit what you did. Sign everything back to the family right now and we won't call the police." Father leaned in. "The police are one phone call away. Fraud, forgery, stealing from your own grandmother's estate. You'll go to prison." Colleen added, "We've documented everything. You have nowhere to run." I looked around at their faces. My father's arrogant, self-righteous fury. My mother's calculated cruelty. My sister's barely hidden glee. I saw Derek staring at his plate, and Vivian looking like she was about to faint. Something shifted deep inside me. I thought about the secret investigation I'd spent 6 months conducting, the lawyer I'd hired, and the criminal complaint I'd filed just 2 days ago. They thought I was unprepared. They thought I didn't know. They invited me here to humiliate me and force a confession to cover their own tracks. They made a terrible mistake. I set my napkin on the table and straightened my back. I looked at my mother, who was reaching for her phone, and said something that brought the whole room to a standstill. "Go ahead. Make the call. Actually, you don't have to bother. They'll be here in about 5 minutes." Absolute silence fell over the room. I watched my father's face shift in 2 seconds. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally, something I'd never seen on him. Fear. Mother's hand hung in midair, not yet reaching the phone. She stared at me, her mouth slightly open, the mask of maternal disappointment beginning to crack at the edges. "What did you just say?" Father's voice was hoarse, stripped of his usual authority. I didn't repeat it. I didn't have to. Instead, I folded my hands on the table and waited. Colleen was the first to recover. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that convinced nobody. "She's bluffing," Colleen said, looking around for allies. "This is exactly what I told you. She's trying to deflect and shift the blame. She's been planning this for years." Mother clung to that excuse like a life raft. She picked up her phone, her confidence visibly returning. "Of course she's bluffing. Meredith, you're pathetic, making threats you can't back up. I'm calling the police right now, and we'll see who they believe." She started dialing. I let her. Derek shifted in his chair. I caught the movement out of the corner of my eye. He was pale, paler than anyone else at the table. His hands were gripping the edge of his seat so hard I could see the tendons in his wrists. He knew. That whispered warning at the door now made perfect sense. Sophie tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, what's happening? Why is everyone yelling?" Derek pulled her close and muttered something, but his eyes never left me. In his gaze, I didn't see judgment, but something closer to relief, as if he'd been waiting for this moment, terrified but hopeful. Mother had 911 keyed in. She looked at me, raising an eyebrow, daring me to back down. I didn't back down. I'd been backing down for 4 years. 4 years of struggling in a city that didn't want me, working dead-end jobs, wondering why every opportunity slipped through my fingers. 4 years of instant noodles and sleepless nights in an apartment so small I could touch 3 walls from my bed. I remembered a specific Christmas 2 years ago. I was working a temp job at a logistics firm, making $8.25 an hour. My contract ended on December 23rd with no warning and no explanation. I spent Christmas Eve alone, eating a bowl of ramen with a single egg because I couldn't afford anything else. I'd called home that night. Mother answered after the 6th ring, sounding annoyed at the interruption. In the background, I heard laughter and music. I asked if I could come home for the holidays. She said it wasn't a good time. She said the guest list was set. She said maybe next year. Then she hung up. I sat in that cold apartment, listening to my neighbors argue through thin walls, wondering what I'd done to deserve being erased from my own family. Now I knew. I hadn't done anything wrong. That was the point. They needed me gone. They needed me struggling, desperate, and too broke to hire a lawyer or investigate the inheritance I didn't know I had. Mother pressed the call button. The phone started ringing. Colleen leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "See?" she announced to everyone. "She has nothing. This is just the bluff of a desperate woman. By this time tomorrow she'll be in a jail cell, which is where she belongs." Sophie's voice broke through the tension. "Mommy, don't speak right now, Sophie." "But Mommy," the little girl persisted, looking at me with clear, innocent eyes. "Why did you tell me not to talk about those files? The ones in Daddy's office with Aunt Meredith's name on them?" The room went dead silent again. Colleen's face turned ash gray. Derek closed his eyes like a man watching the final domino fall. "Sophie, be quiet." Colleen's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "But you said it was a secret." Sophie's lip trembled. "You said Aunt Meredith was bad, that she took things that weren't hers. But Aunt Meredith isn't bad. She's nice. She always sends me birthday cards." Something shattered in my chest. Through it all, through 4 years of exile, I'd never forgotten Sophie's birthday. I sent cards every year, never knowing if they arrived, never getting a reply. But she had received them. She remembered. Mother was speaking into the phone now, her voice tight and controlled. "Yes, I need to report a crime. Financial fraud. I need officers to come to this address immediately." Great Aunt Vivian suddenly stood up, her chair scraping across the floor with a sound like a wounded animal. She looked as pale as a ghost. "Eleanor knew," she whispered. "My God, she knew this would happen." "Vivian, sit down," Father barked, though his voice sounded strangled. "This doesn't concern you." "She knew," Aunt Vivian repeated, as if praying. "She told me, she made me promise, and I was too much of a coward to say anything." She turned to me, tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Meredith. I am so sorry." I didn't fully understand what she meant yet, but I tucked it away as one more piece of the puzzle I was assembling. Mother finished the call and gave me a cold, triumphant smile. "They're on their way," she announced. 20 minutes. I suggest you use that time to think about what you're going to say next." I looked at her, at my father, at Colleen, at Derek, and at the trembling Aunt Vivian. Then I heard it. Faint at first, but growing louder. The sound of cars pulling into the driveway, doors opening, footsteps on the gravel. I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 6 months preparing for this exact moment. "They don't need 20 minutes, I said, because I called them 2 days ago. My family had no idea that for the past 6 months I had been preparing for this day. It all started with a letter that shouldn't have been delivered to me." 6 months before that Christmas dinner, I was sitting in my cramped Atlanta apartment. It was a 400-square-foot dump on the 3rd floor with no elevator. My air conditioner rattled constantly, and my kitchen was so small I could touch both walls with my arms outstretched. I'd just finished an 8-hour shift of data entry. My feet ached, and my bank account had $217 to last until the next payday. Rent was due in 5 days, $650. The math just didn't add up. The landlord slid the mail under my door, bills, junk mail, and one envelope that looked different. It was thick, expensive, and embossed with a logo. It was forwarded from my old address, an address I hadn't used in years. The return address read, First Coast Bank Trust, Savannah, Georgia. I opened it. My name was at the top, printed with clinical precision. Ms. Meredith Ann Callahan. Subject, Unusual Activity Alert, the Eleanor Beaumont Memorial Trust. I read those words 3 times. Eleanor Beaumont was my grandmother. She'd died 4 years ago. I'd attended the funeral, sitting in the back row because nobody in the family had saved me a seat. I'd never heard of any memorial trust. The letter explained that the bank was notifying me of major withdrawal activity. As the sole beneficiary and account holder, they wanted me to verify transactions totaling over $800,000. It had to be a mistake. Surely there was another Meredith Callahan. But the letter had my correct middle name, my old address, and the last 4 digits of my social security number. I called the bank, my hands shaking. After 20 minutes on hold, I finally spoke to a woman named Denise. "Yes, Ms. Callahan," she said cautiously. "I see your account here. The Eleanor Beaumont Memorial Trust, established 4 years ago. You're listed as the sole beneficiary. The current balance is $143,212. I asked her to repeat the number. My voice sounded thin. "What was the initial deposit?" Another pause. $2.4 million. The room tilted. Someone had withdrawn over $2 million from an account I didn't know existed, an account in my name. Denise hesitated when I asked who authorized the withdrawals. According to our records, she said, choosing her words carefully, it was you, Ms. Callahan. We have signed authorizations for every transaction. I told her I had never signed anything. I told her I hadn't been to Savannah in 3 years. Ms. Callahan, Denise finally said, I think you need to come in. You should bring identification, multiple forms of it. How soon can you get to Savannah? 3 days later, I was on a Greyhound bus. 7 hours through the night. I arrived in Savannah exhausted and terrified, walked to the bank, and sat on the bench outside until they opened at 9 a.m. The bank was filled with marble floors and quiet, somber professionalism. Everyone wore suits. I felt completely out of place in my cleanest jeans and a borrowed shirt. Then I reminded myself that someone had stolen over $2 million using my name. I belonged there more than anyone. The account manager, a woman named Catherine, showed me the files. The trust was established a month after my grandmother died. My grandmother's signature was on the documents. It was legal. I was the sole beneficiary. That part was true. Grandma had left me the money. Then Catherine showed me the withdrawal authorizations, 12 of them, spanning 4 years. Every single one had my signature. Every single one was notarized in Savannah. I stared at my own handwriting, except it wasn't mine. It was close, really close. But the M was too rounded. The H in Callahan didn't connect the way I wrote it. The pressure was lighter, more hesitant. I recognized the style. It was the same hand that had forged permission slips in high school. The same hand that had framed me for a broken vase when I was 12. Colleen. Catherine showed me where the money went. 3 accounts, 2 personal accounts with names hidden for privacy, and 1 business account, Mercer Real Estate Holdings. My blood turned to ice. Mercer, that was Derek's last name. It was Colleen's company. There's also the matter of the real estate, Catherine said quietly. The Eleanor Beaumont estate on Victory Drive was also in your name. It was transferred to Mercer Real Estate Holdings 18 months ago. Grandma's house, the place where I'd spent my happiest summers. They'd taken that too. Catherine handed me the final document, a slightly faded copy of Eleanor Beaumont's will. To my son Victor, I leave $10,000 and my forgiveness for years of neglect. To my granddaughter Colleen, I leave $10,000 and the hope that she learns to distinguish between want and deserve. To my dear granddaughter Meredith, who sat by my side when others ignored me, who read to me when my eyes grew dim, and who loved me unconditionally, I leave the remainder of all my assets, the trust, the estate, and my shares of the family company. Grandma had left me everything, and my family had stolen it all. I left the bank fueled by a rage I didn't know I possessed. But anger without a plan is just noise. I needed someone to turn my anger into justice. 2 weeks later, I was climbing the creaky wooden stairs of a Victorian building near Forsyth Park. A golden sign on a frosted glass door read, James Whitmore, attorney. He was known for taking cases others were afraid to touch. One review had stuck with me. When no one else believed me, he did. When I told him my name was Callahan, his expression shifted. I've heard stories about them, he said. He didn't elaborate, but I understood. In Savannah, everyone knows everyone's secrets. They just pretend they don't. I laid out my documents. The trust papers, the authorizations, the bank transfers, and Grandma's will. James took notes in a leather-bound journal. He sent my signature samples to a forensic document examiner, a former FBI expert with 23 years of experience. The results came back 10 days later. My real signature was a clear mismatch. The forged writing had a 97% probability of matching another hand. James asked for handwriting samples from my sister. I had a box of old birthday cards and notes, the evidence of a sisterhood that never really existed. I provided them. The results confirmed what I'd already suspected, a 97% match with Colleen's handwriting. My sister had forged every document. She'd spent her whole life practicing how to deceive. But James found more. He discovered that my grandmother's shares in the family business had been sold to Callahan Holdings, my father's company, for $200,000. The actual market value was over $1.2 million. The authorization for that sale featured my forged signature, dated on a day I had time cards and security footage proving I was in Atlanta. They didn't just steal your inheritance, James said quietly. They used your name to buy your grandmother's life work for pennies on the dollar. Over $4.5 million, stolen by the people who were supposed to love me. But James wasn't done. There's one more thing, he said. It has nothing to do with money, but you need to see it. His assistant, Nina, had tracked down the source of the anonymous tip-offs that had ruined my job applications for years. Every rejection, every no, it had been my family. They'd emailed HR departments, claiming I had a history of theft and couldn't be trusted. They'd destroyed my career to keep me poor and desperate, ensuring I'd never have the resources to find out what they'd done. James laid out my options. We can sue immediately, but they'll hire expensive lawyers to delay and destroy evidence. Or we can wait, build the case quietly and strike when they least expect it. I thought about what I wanted. It wasn't just the money. I wanted them to feel the shock, the helplessness, and the betrayal I'd lived with for years. I wanted to see the look on their faces when their perfect crime collapsed. 3 weeks ago, I received the Christmas card from my mother, an invitation to the scene of the crime. James asked when I wanted to make my move. I told him Christmas, when the whole family was together with nowhere to hide. He nodded slowly, a cold smile crossing his face. Then we have work to do. The doorbell rang, sharp and clear. Not one person at the table moved. They sat frozen, staring at the entryway, as if expecting a monster to emerge from the shadows. Father recovered first. He pushed back his chair and straightened his jacket. "I'll handle this," he announced, his voice regaining its tone of authority. "This is still my house." He walked toward the front door with forced confidence. Mother started to follow, then stopped, looking uncertain for the first time all night. Colleen's smug expression had dissolved into something else. Confusion and a flicker of fear. I stayed in my seat, let them wonder. The front door opened. I heard Father's voice, boisterous and demanding. "Officer, thank you for coming. I'm Victor Callahan. I was about to call you myself. There's a situation with my daughter." A man's voice interrupted him, steady and professional, piercing through Father's facade. "Mr. Callahan, we aren't here for your call. We're here at the request of Ms. Meredith Callahan." A heavy silence followed. I heard Father's voice again, sounding smaller. "What?" Then a woman's voice. "Is Ms. Meredith Callahan present? We need to speak with her." I slowly stood up and smoothed my dress. Every eye in the room tracked my movement. Mother had gone white. Colleen gripped the edge of the table as if she might fall. Derek closed his eyes, his shoulders slumping in what looked like relief. "Please, come in," I called toward the foyer. "We have a lot to talk about." 2 officers walked into the dining room. The male officer, Reynolds, had the weary eyes of a man who had seen everything. The younger officer, Chen, was sharp and alert. Both held the serious demeanor of professionals about to deliver bad news. Father followed them into the room, wearing a mask of disbelief. He looked at me with an expression of genuine confusion, as if I'd suddenly become a stranger. "Meredith," he said, "what have you done?" I ignored him and turned to the officers. "Thank you for coming. I know Christmas Eve isn't an ideal time." Officer Reynolds nodded. "We received your complaint 2 days ago, Ms. Callahan. Given the evidence you provided, the district attorney felt this warranted immediate action." A third person appeared in the doorway. James Whitmore, my lawyer. He carried his familiar briefcase, looking composed and confident. "Everyone," I said, "this is James Whitmore, my attorney." Mother made a faint sound, halfway between a gasp and a sob. She recognized the name. Years ago, James had prosecuted one of my parents' business associates in a fraud case, and won handily. "This is ridiculous." Colleen found her voice, pointing at the officers. "This is a private family matter. Our sister is manipulating you with lies. We are the victims here. She's the one who stole from us." Officer Chen remained expressionless. "Ma'am, we are here to investigate allegations of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement. These are criminal matters, not family ones." Mother tried another strategy, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. "Officers, please, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. Our daughter has always been troubled. Whatever she told you isn't the whole truth." James set his briefcase on the sideboard and opened it methodically. "Mrs. Callahan, I understand this is difficult, but we have documented evidence of serious crimes. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement, and grand theft. These aren't misunderstandings. These are felonies." Colleen stood up abruptly, pointing at me. "This is insane! She stole from us! We have proof right here!" She grabbed the manila folder she'd shown me earlier. Show them what she did." Officer Reynolds calmly took the folder. He flipped through a few pages, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up at Colleen. "Ma'am," he said, "we've already seen these documents. They are part of the reason we are here." Colleen's confidence faltered. "What? No, these prove she—" "These prove someone committed forgery," Officer Reynolds said. "The question is, who exactly did it?" He handed the folder to James. My lawyer pulled a large envelope from his briefcase and slid out several documents magnified to poster size. One of the officers set up a portable easel at the end of the dining table. James began his presentation with the calm, precise demeanor of a surgeon starting an operation. "On the left," he said, placing the first blow-up on the easel, "you will see verified samples of Meredith Callahan's actual signature, pulled from her bank accounts, tax returns, and employment paperwork in Atlanta. All of these are notarized, time-stamped, and certified." He placed a second enlargement right next to it. These were the signatures from the trust fund withdrawals, the property transfers, and the sale of the family company shares. Even from across the room, the differences were glaring. The loops in the letter M, the way the H connected to the A, the angle of the strokes. Nothing matched. "These signatures were examined by a forensic document expert," James continued, "a former FBI analyst with 23 years of experience. His conclusion is that there is a 97% certainty these two sets of signatures were written by different people. The very documents this family brought forward as proof of Meredith's theft are actually the proof of the forgery committed against her." Father's face turned the color of an old brick. He gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles turning white. "Experts make mistakes," he muttered. "Experts can be bought. This doesn't prove a thing." Ignoring him, James pulled out another file. The withdrawal authorizations span 4 years, and every single one was supposedly signed by Meredith here in Savannah, but we have records showing exactly where Meredith was on those dates. He displayed a timeline, employment records from the Atlanta temp agency, apartment lease documents, debit card transactions in Atlanta on the exact days these papers were allegedly signed in Savannah. One date even showed a medical record from a doctor's appointment 250 miles away. "Meredith couldn't have signed these documents in Savannah," James said, "because she was in Atlanta. Someone else signed her name. Someone else committed fraud." I watched my family's reactions. Father's jaw was clamped tight. Mother had stopped crying. Her face was now a cold mask of calculation. Colleen's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Under the table, I caught a glimpse of her hand moving, trying to text someone on her phone beneath the tablecloth. Derek sat completely still, staring at the evidence with grim resignation. He had known. Maybe not everything, but enough to warn me when I arrived, and enough to look relieved when the police walked in. Sophie had fallen asleep on the corner sofa, exhausted by the tension she couldn't understand. It was a small mercy. Great Aunt Vivian spoke for the first time since her sudden outburst earlier. Her voice was quiet but steady. "How much did they take?" James checked his notes. "Over $2.3 million from the trust fund, a historic mansion valued at over $1 million, and company shares worth roughly $1.2 million. The documented theft totals over $4.5 million. The number dropped like a bomb. Even Officer Chen's professional composure wavered for a second. Mother made one last attempt. "Officers, please. My daughter clearly has psychological issues. She's concocted this elaborate fantasy to hurt her family. Whatever documents this lawyer brought are the real forgeries. We are the victims here." Officer Reynolds stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to James. "Mr. Whitmore, do you have records of when these suspected forgeries occurred?" James nodded and produced another folder. "Every withdrawal, every transfer, every signature. All dated and time-stamped, cross-referenced with Meredith's verified location records. The notary logs show discrepancies, and printer metadata reveals that some documents were created months after their alleged execution dates." He laid each piece of evidence on the table, building a wall of proof that grew higher with every sheet of paper. "And then there's the property transfer," James continued. "The Eleanor Beaumont estate on Victory Drive was sold to Mercer Real Estate Holdings for $75,000. The market value is well over $1 million. The authorization bears Meredith's forged signature." Colleen flinched at the mention of the company name. Her company, her signature. Father made a final desperate stand. "This is all circumstantial. It doesn't prove who—" James cut him off. "We also have the IP logs. We traced the anonymous emails sent to Meredith's potential employers over the last 3 years, the ones that ruined her career with false allegations. Every single one of them was sent from the internet connection right here in this house." The room went dead silent. Then, from across the table, Derek stood up. His voice was quiet but clear. "I have some information, something I should have said a long time ago. There's a safe in the study. I know the combination. What's inside will answer all your questions." Derek led the way, with Officer Reynolds walking beside him. The rest of us followed, forming a strange procession down the dimly lit hallway. Father's heavy footsteps echoed behind me, mixed with the uneven click of Mother's heels on the hardwood. Colleen had gone completely silent, her face a pale ghost in the low light. The study used to be my grandmother's favorite room. Dark wood paneling lined the walls, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held the literature she'd collected over a lifetime. Above the fireplace hung an oil portrait of Eleanor Beaumont, her eyes seeming to watch everything below. The room smelled of old leather and secrets. I remembered sitting in the worn leather chair by the window, listening to her read aloud. She loved this room. In the final years of her life, she practically lived in it. Now it belonged to my father, filled with his flashy trophies and bloated ego. On the antique desk sat a framed photograph. My father, Mother, and Colleen were posing in front of the very house we were standing in. I leaned closer, and a chill went through my chest. I remembered the day that photo was taken, because I was originally in it. In this version, I had been cropped out, completely erased from the family portrait. It was just as thorough as their attempt to erase me from Grandma's legacy. Derek walked over to the furthest bookshelf. He moved a few volumes aside, revealing a panel that blended seamlessly with the woodwork. Behind it sat a safe with a digital keypad and a combination dial. "Colleen thought I never noticed anything," he said quietly. "She thought I was asleep when she made her phone calls. She left files in her home office thinking I never looked. But I did. I watched, I listened, and I waited for someone to finally ask the right questions." His fingers moved over the keypad with familiar precision. A series of beeps was followed by the heavy click of a deadbolt disengaging. The safe door swung open. Inside were stacks of folders, a fireproof box, several thumb drives, and bundles of cash secured with rubber bands. It was more than anyone had anticipated. This wasn't just about my inheritance, this was everything. James Whitmore pulled on a pair of latex gloves before touching anything. "Preserving the evidence," he explained. He began removing the items one by one, photographing each one before placing it on the desk. Officer Reynolds took notes while Officer Chen stood by the door, keeping an eye on the rest of the family. The first discovery confirmed what I already knew, the trust withdrawal authorizations, all 12 of them, all bearing my forged signature. But there was something I didn't know. Each form had a second signature line, witnessed and approved by Patricia Callahan. It was my mother's real handwriting. No forgery. She had personally signed off on every single theft. I stared at her signature. All those years she had claimed money was tight, telling me they couldn't help with my rent, my bills, or my groceries. All while she was approving the theft of millions that belonged to me. James turned to the property transfer. The Victory Drive mansion sold to Mercer Real Estate for $75,000. He read the numbers aloud for the officers. "A historic Savannah home worth over $1 million, sold to your sister's company for pennies. That's not a sale. That's theft with a paper trail." Next came the company shares. Grandma Eleanor's 35% stake in Beaumont Realty sold to father's company, Callahan Holdings, for $200,000. The actual value at the time was over $1.2 million. James pulled bank statements from another folder, wire transfer confirmations, and a handwritten ledger in Colleen's distinct script, tracking where every stolen dollar went. The numbers were staggering. My parents' joint account had received $800,000 over 4 years. That money bought a vacation home in Charleston I'd never heard of, new cars and country club memberships, all part of the lifestyle they claimed they were barely maintaining. Colleen and Derek's accounts had received $1 million. Designer shopping trips, private school tuition for Sophie, and business investments that Colleen had described to everyone as just breaking even. Derek's voice cut through the reading. "I never saw that money. She told me the business was struggling. She said our margins were razor thin." A third account appeared in the records. An offshore account in the Cayman Islands, $400,000. The signatory was Victor Callahan. Purpose unknown. From the dining room, we heard Colleen's voice rising. Officer Chen had stayed behind to watch her and my mother. The walls of the old house could barely muffle the argument that had exploded between them. "It was your idea," Colleen's words carried clearly. "You came to me. You said nobody would ever find out." Mother's response was just as loud. "Don't you dare pin this on me. You went along with it willingly. You said you knew how to mimic her signature. You said it would be easy." Father's face had turned a sickly gray. He held onto the doorframe of the study, watching the evidence pile up and listening to his wife and daughter tear each other apart. James found something else deep inside the safe. A folder marked in a handwriting I didn't recognize. "Eleanor," it read, "to be destroyed." Inside were my grandmother's medical records from her final weeks, a power of attorney designation naming my father as her decision-maker. The document was dated a week before Eleanor died. Her signature was shaky and barely legible. Attached to it was a doctor's note. "Patient showing signs of disorientation. Capacity for decision-making is questionable. They got the power of attorney when she was too weak to understand what she was signing," James said. His voice was flat and professional, but I could hear the disgust beneath it. Then they used it to access the accounts, setting everything up to strip her bare before she even passed. Clipped to the power of attorney was a smaller scrap of paper. It was a note written in Eleanor's trembling hand. "Victor won't tell me what I signed. Something is wrong. V knows. V will help. M.V. Vivian." My grandmother had reached out to her sister. She knew something was wrong. She tried to protect me. But she was too weak, too disoriented, and too isolated by the people who were supposed to protect her. I thought about my grandmother in that hospital room, surrounded by family members who only wanted to know how much they were getting. Dying alone, with her only real company being the granddaughter they later spent years trying to ruin. We walked back into the dining room. The scene was a far cry from the elegant Christmas dinner we'd started with. Father was slumped in his chair, his face buried in his hands. Mother was staring blankly into space, her makeup ruined, her fingers gripping the pearls around her neck. Eleanor's pearls, the ones that should have been mine. Colleen sat rigid and silent, her earlier hysterics replaced by a cold, hard look. Even now I realized she was calculating, looking for angles, looking for an escape route, looking for someone else to blame. Sophie was still asleep on the corner sofa, Derek's jacket draped over her small frame. She was the only innocent person in the room, blissfully unaware of the destruction around her. Officer Reynolds spoke up. "We have more than enough to proceed. Based on the documents found and the prior complaint filed by Ms. Callahan, we have probable cause for an arrest." Colleen snapped her head up. "Arrest? You can't arrest us. It's Christmas." Officer Chen began reading their rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mother let out a sound like a wounded animal. She slid from her chair, dropping to her knees in front of me, her hands clawing at my dress. "Please, Meredith, please, I'm your mother. We can fix this. We can explain everything. Don't do this to your family." I looked down at her. At the woman who signed her name to take my inheritance, who helped destroy my career, and who removed me from every family photo and Christmas dinner that mattered. "You stopped being my family," I said, "the day you decided I was worth more to you as a victim than a daughter." Great Aunt Vivian stepped forward. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "Before anyone is taken anywhere, there's one more thing Meredith needs to see." She reached into her purse and pulled out a yellowed envelope, its edges softened by time. "Eleanor gave this to me a week before she died," Vivian said. "She made me swear to keep it safe and give it to Meredith only when the truth finally came out." She handed the envelope to me. I saw my grandmother's handwriting on the front, just 2 words, "For Meredith." The wax seal crumbled under my thumb, just like the 4 years of lies finally collapsing. Inside were 3 pages of yellowed paper, covered on both sides by my grandmother's elegant script. The same handwriting that had written tags on my birthday gifts as a child. The same hand that signed my school permission slips when my parents forgot. The same hand that wrote to me during my freshman year of college when I was homesick and lonely, wondering if anyone actually cared. "Everyone should hear this," I said. "She wanted it known." The room went quiet. Father remained slumped in his chair. Mother was on the floor. Colleen sat rigid, watching me with a mix of hatred and fear. Derek stood by the sleeping Sophie, shielding her, separate from the others. Great Aunt Vivian held a handkerchief to her eyes. The officers waited with professional patience. I began to read. "My dearest Meredith, if you are reading this, then my worst fears have come to pass. I am writing this from my hospital bed. I expect to pass within 3 days. My body is failing, but my mind, despite what they want people to believe, remains clear. I have made decisions that certain members of this family will not understand. They will try to undo them. This letter is my truth, kept for the day you need it. I paused, hearing her voice through the words. The sharp clarity, the refusal to sugarcoat the truth. This was the grandmother I remembered. Strong, honest, and loving me in a way that didn't require a performance. The next part of the letter was her assessment of my father. Your father, my son, has disappointed me for 30 years. He married for money and calculated for more. He sees people as tools and love as a weakness. I tried to teach him better. I failed. Father didn't look up. He sat motionless, taking the judgment of a dead woman he'd been stealing from for years. 3 days ago, he brought papers to my bedside. He said it was routine. I played along, acting too tired to see. But I saw enough. He wanted power of attorney. He wanted control of everything I'd spent my life building. He thought I was too weak to notice. Eleanor knew. Even in her final days, surrounded by vultures wearing the masks of family, she saw right through them. The second page turned to my mother. Your mother is more dangerous than your father. Victor acts out of greed. Patricia acts out of cruelty, a cruelty disguised as concern. She convinced your father that controlling you was protecting you. But I watched her. I saw how she treated you compared to Colleen. You were never her favorite. You were the scapegoat, the one they could blame when things went wrong, the one they could sacrifice when they needed to. Mother let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a protest. She had always painted herself as the gentle peacemaker, the loving mother caught between difficult children. The letter tore that facade away. Eleanor's words for Colleen were the harshest of all. Colleen learned well from her parents. She has your mother's manipulation and your father's ambition. When she was 16, I caught her forging your signature on a birthday card. A small thing, but telling. When I confronted her, she laughed. She said it was just a joke. It was never a joke, Meredith. It was practice. I looked at my sister. Her face had gone completely white. Her calculated composure had finally shattered. Eleanor had seen the pattern decades ago, watched it develop, and tried to warn me in the only way she could. The letter explained why she had chosen me. You are not like them, Meredith. I don't know why, but you aren't. When I was sick, you came. Not for a will, not for money. You came because you loved me. You read to me when I couldn't see the print. You held my hand through the long nights when nobody else visited. You were the only one who saw me as a person, not an estate. Tears blurred my vision. I remembered those visits. Driving 4 hours each way, sleeping in hospital chairs, reading Jane Austen because Eleanor said it reminded her of her mother. I thought nobody noticed, nobody cared. But she saw everything. The third page held Eleanor's warning. Vivian told me something that broke my heart. They have been sabotaging your future. The anonymous letters, the phone calls, Patricia and Colleen working together to ensure you never succeed. They want you dependent. Dependent people don't ask questions. They want you poor. Poor people don't hire lawyers. Colleen's voice broke through my reading. She's lying. Grandma was confused, senile. That letter is a fake. Meredith wrote it herself to frame us. Great Aunt Vivian spoke before I could respond. I was there when Eleanor wrote it, Colleen. I watched her write every word over 3 nights. I saw her seal it with her own ring. And I have the hospital visitor logs proving you didn't visit her once during the last month of her life. Not once. Meredith was the only one there. Absolute silence. I turned back to the letter and read Eleanor's final instructions. I changed my will 3 times in my final year. Each time Victor found out. Each time he interfered. This final version was drawn up secretly with a lawyer he doesn't know. The trust, the house, the company shares. It is all left to you. If they try to take it, fight them. You are stronger than you think. Eleanor had prepared for this fight. She knew this day would come. She'd armed me the only way she could, with documents, with the truth, and with the memory of her belief in me. Colleen stood up suddenly. This is ridiculous. We don't have to listen to this. This letter doesn't prove anything. It's just the ramblings of a dying woman who didn't know what she was doing. James Whitmore stepped forward. Actually, the letter is backed up by every single piece of evidence we've gathered. The forged signatures, the fraudulent transfers, and the career-sabotaging emails traced back to this very house. He opened another folder. Since we're discussing full disclosure, we have the logs for the 11 anonymous emails sent to the companies Meredith applied to over 3 years. The handwriting analysis shows 2 distinct authors. Some are formal and corporate, others are more emotional and personal. He looked at my mother. The formal ones match Patricia's communication patterns. Then he looked at Colleen. The emotional ones contain details only a family member would know. He held up a page pointing to a highlighted line. She has a history of theft within her own family. I would not trust her with company resources. The exact same accusation they'd thrown at me tonight. They'd been rehearsing it for years, poisoning my reputation in advance so that if I ever discovered the truth, nobody would believe me. Colleen snapped. It was your idea, she screamed, spinning around to face our mother. You came to me. You said we needed to protect the family estate. You said Meredith would waste the money. You said Grandma owed us more than she left us. Patricia struggled to her feet. Don't you dare put this on me. You volunteered to forge the signatures. You said you'd practiced. You said it was easy. I did what you told me to do. Colleen's voice rose to a shriek. You and Dad planned the whole thing. I just executed it. Officer Reynolds stepped between them. Ma'am, are you stating that you were instructed by your parents to forge those documents? Colleen froze, realizing exactly what she'd just admitted to. I want a lawyer. You'll get one, but what you just said is on the record. Officer Reynolds turned to his partner. Officer Chen, please read the formal charges. She stepped forward, pulling documents from her folder. Victor Callahan, Patricia Callahan, Colleen Mercer. You are being detained for investigation regarding allegations of fraud, forgery, embezzlement, and potential elder abuse in connection with the estate of Eleanor Beaumont. Colleen began to sob. You can't do this. It's Christmas. My daughter is here. Sophie stirred on the sofa, woken by the noise. Derek quickly scooped her up and carried her toward the kitchen, away from the chaos. Mother made one last desperate grab for my hand. Please, Meredith. I'm your mother. Whatever I did, it was because I loved you. I wanted to protect you from making mistakes with that much money. Please don't destroy this family. I looked at her. At the woman who signed her name to steal my inheritance, who helped write emails calling me a thief, and who left me to struggle in poverty while using my grandmother's money to buy vacation homes. You destroyed it yourself, I said, years ago. I'm just showing everyone the wreckage. The officers began leading them toward the door. Father walked quietly, completely defeated. Mother cried with every step, begging. Colleen alternated between screaming and sobbing as her carefully constructed life crashed down around her. Great Aunt Vivian put her arm around me as we watched them leave. Eleanor would be proud of you, she whispered. I looked down at the letter still gripped tightly in my hand, at my grandmother's final words of love and warning. I know, I said. I just wish she could have been here to see it. The taillights of the police cars disappeared down the oak-lined driveway. For the first time in 4 years, I could breathe. But the night was far from over. There were statements to take, decisions to make, and a little girl whose future needed someone to look out for her. James Whitmore drove me to the police station. Great Aunt Vivian followed in her own car. Derek arrived separately with Sophie asleep in the back seat, her small body curled under a blanket, completely unaware of the ruin that had consumed her family. Midnight Savannah on Christmas Eve was beautiful, the kind of beauty unique to southern cities. Holiday lights decorated every historic house, and the Spanish moss gleamed silver under the streetlights. People were safely indoors, gathered around trees and dinner tables, enjoying the warmth of the people who loved them. The contrast felt almost cruel compared to where I was heading. The station welcomed us with fluorescent lights bright enough to make me squint. The air smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Someone had taped paper snowflakes to the bulletin board near the entrance, the only nod to the holidays, looking completely out of place against the gray walls and institutional furniture. A detective named Morrison met us in the lobby. He was a man in his 50s with kind eyes, and his firm handshake told me he'd seen it all and believed very little of it. He led me to an interview room, where I spent 2 hours going over every detail of the case. The letters from the bank, the investigation with James, the evidence gathering, the timeline I'd spent 6 months building during countless sleepless nights. Detective Morrison recorded everything, asking questions I'd already answered for James, but I understood it was necessary for the official record. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair, studying me with something resembling respect. I've seen a lot of family fraud cases, he said. This one is exceptionally detailed. Your preparation saved us months of investigation. How long have you been planning this? 6 months, I told him. Since the day I found out they'd stolen everything my grandmother left me. He nodded slowly. And you waited until Christmas to confront them? I wanted them all in one place. I wanted them to have nowhere to hide. His expression showed he understood far more than I was saying. When I stepped out of the interview room, I found Derek waiting for me in the hallway. Sophie was asleep in a nearby break room, where a female officer had found a blanket and a pillow to cushion the small sofa. Derek looked completely drained, his face gaunt from the weight of everything that had happened. "Meredith," he said, "I need to ask you a favor. It's about Sophie." Before he even spoke, I knew what he was going to say. Colleen was under arrest. My parents were processed. Her only other relatives were Great Aunt Vivian and me. He took a deep breath. "If anything happens during my questioning, if they decide to hold me for any reason, can you look after her, just until I'm cleared? She trusts you. She loves you. I can't have her going to strangers on Christmas." I looked into the break room where Sophie was sleeping. Colleen's daughter, the child of the woman who had forged my signature, ruined my career, and stolen my inheritance. But Sophie was only 7. Sophie had run to hug me the moment I walked through the door. Sophie remembered every birthday card I'd sent, even when nobody else acknowledged my existence. "I'll take care of her," I said, "whatever she needs." Derek's shoulders dropped with relief. "Thank you. I know I have no right to ask you." "You have every right. You're her father, and you tried to warn me." His eyes filled with tears. "She talks about you all the time," he whispered. "She calls you the nice aunt. She always knew." The requests for negotiation began shortly after. First came a message from my mother. A detective informed me that Patricia was demanding to speak with me, claiming she had information that could help everyone. James advised against it. "Anything she says will be an attempt to manipulate you," he warned. "She's looking for leverage." I told the detective no, I had nothing to say to her. Then my father's lawyer arrived. Richard Pemberton III, the Callahan family attorney for decades, wearing an expensive suit even at midnight. He requested a word with me regarding a private resolution. "Your father wants you to know he's prepared to make amends," Pemberton said. "Full restitution, every single dollar. A public apology if that's what you want. In exchange, the family asks that you drop the charges. Let this be handled within the family, where it belongs." He paused, adjusting his cufflinks. "He's also prepared to offer a substantial settlement for the trouble you've experienced." James cut in before I could respond. "Mr. Pemberton, your client is facing criminal charges brought by the state. Ms. Callahan's cooperation is a factor, but she doesn't control the prosecution. And frankly, this conversation is bordering on witness tampering." I looked straight at Pemberton. 4 years. I spent 4 years wondering why I couldn't succeed. They bought beach houses while I ate ramen. They drove luxury cars while I borrowed money for a bus ticket. And now he wants to buy his way out. I stood up. "Tell him no. Tell him there isn't an amount of money in the world that can buy my silence. Tell him I'm not for sale. I never was. That's why they had to steal from me." Pemberton left without another word. The final attempt was a handwritten note from Colleen, passed along by an officer. I recognized the handwriting instantly, the same hand that had forged my signature 100 times. The note claimed she'd been under duress, forced into the scheme by our parents. She begged me to remember the good times we'd shared as sisters and promised to make everything up to me if I could help keep her out of prison. I read it twice, looking for anything real, any acknowledgement of what she'd actually done, any real remorse. I found nothing but manipulation wrapped in the guise of sisterly love. I handed the note to James to be filed as evidence of her attempt to influence a witness. In the early hours of the morning, I found myself alone with Great Aunt Vivian in the break room. Sophie was still sleeping, Derek was finishing his statement, and James was handling paperwork. For the first time all night, there was a moment of quiet. "I need to tell you something," Vivian said, "while I still have the courage." She held a cup of cold coffee with both hands. "I should have spoken up years ago. I didn't. I'm sorry." She told me everything. How Eleanor had confided in her during those final months. How she'd learned about the suspicious documents, the pressure Victor was applying, and the sabotage of my career. Eleanor had made her promise to protect me if anything happened. But after Eleanor died, Victor came to see me, Vivian said. He told me that if I ever breathed a word of what I knew, he'd ruin me too. He knew things about my past. Mistakes I'd made when I was younger, financial issues, a relationship I'd kept hidden. He said he'd expose it all, destroy my reputation, and ruin my standing in the community. Her voice broke. "I was a coward. I traded your future for my comfort. I watched you struggle for 4 years, knowing I could have stopped it. But I didn't." I sat there, processing her words. The anger was right below the surface. Vivian could have saved me from years of hardship. A single phone call or conversation would have changed my life completely. But looking at her now, I saw another victim, someone trapped by the same fear Victor used to control everyone. "You kept Eleanor's letter safe," I finally said. "When they would have destroyed it, you kept it. And you stepped up when it counted most." "I wish I'd been braver," she whispered. "He controlled all of us in different ways. At least you broke free." The clock on the wall showed it was past 3 a.m. Christmas Day had officially begun inside a police precinct. Detective Morrison returned to give us an update. All three had been formally booked: Victor, Patricia, and the sister who had signed away my life. A bail hearing was set for December 26th. The charges included multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and embezzlement, with elder abuse charges still under investigation. "The district attorney is personally handling this," Morrison added. "It's going to be a major case." Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Ms. Callahan, you've fully cooperated. The state will move forward regardless of your wishes, but I need to ask you formally. Do you want to pursue civil restitution alongside the criminal prosecution? You have the right to demand full repayment through the civil courts. Given the evidence, you have a very strong case. But it means years of trials, depositions, and public testimony. The choice is yours." Beside me, James said softly, "You don't have to decide tonight." But I already knew. I remembered those 4 years of struggling, the ramen dinners, the rejected job applications, and the nights spent tossing and turning, wondering what was wrong with me. I thought of my grandmother, alone in her hospital bed, trying to protect me even as death approached. "I'm not walking away," I said. "I want full accountability, criminal and civil." Detective Morrison nodded. "We'll see you in court then." Outside, the first light of Christmas morning crept across Savannah. My gift this year wasn't wrapped in paper or ribbons. It was harder, colder, and far more precious than anything under a tree. It was justice, and I was going to see it through. I promised myself I would get justice. It took a year, but I kept that promise. Exactly 1 year after that Christmas Eve, I stood in a Savannah courtroom and watched my family's empire finally collapse. The Chatham County Courthouse was full of polished wood, high ceilings, and the heavy weight of thousands of past judgments. A December chill pressed against the tall windows. I sat behind the prosecution table with James Whitmore by my side. He was no longer just my lawyer, he was a trusted friend forged in the fires of this battle. Great Aunt Vivian sat in the gallery. A few rows back sat Derek, his presence a silent show of support. Sophie wasn't there. We all agreed to protect her from this. The judge called the court to order. My father went first. Victor Callahan had spent months fighting the charges, hiring expensive lawyers, and filing motion after motion to delay the inevitable. In the end, the evidence was too overwhelming. He pled guilty to lesser charges to avoid the maximum sentence: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit forgery. The judge read every count aloud. 4 years in federal prison. Eligible for parole in 2. Ordered to pay full restitution for all documented theft. When the sentence was read, Father didn't look at me. He stared at the table in front of him, looking like a broken old man in a suit that no longer fit. The patriarch who had ruled the Callahan family for decades was now just a number in the federal prison system. Next was my mother. Patricia chose to plead no contest, unable to face a trial that would expose every cruel detail of her actions. Conspiracy to commit fraud, obstruction of justice. Her lawyer argued for leniency, citing severe anxiety and depression. The exact same excuses she used to weaponize against me, now deployed for her own defense. 18 months of probation. She had to surrender her passport, attend mandatory therapy, and report to a probation officer weekly. The former social queen of Savannah would spend the next year and a half under the strict supervision of the court. Colleen fought the longest. 8 months of motions, delays, and finger-pointing. She went through 3 different lawyers and even tried to cut a deal to testify against our parents in exchange for immunity. None of it worked. The evidence was too meticulous. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement, identity theft. The charges stacked up like bricks. 3 years in state prison. When the verdict was read, my sister screamed. She pointed at me across the courtroom, her face twisted with rage. "This is your fault," she shrieked. "You did this to me." The bailiffs had to restrain her. The same finger that had accused me at Christmas dinner now pointed at me from behind handcuffs. I watched them lead her away. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt exhausted, empty, and a strange sense of grief. Not for them, but for the family I never really had, and for the illusion that was now completely shattered. 3 months after the criminal convictions, the civil case was settled. My family's lawyers knew they couldn't win. The only question was how much I could recover. The liquidation took weeks. The trust fund originally held $2.4 million, but only $143,000 remained when the theft was discovered. The court ordered full restitution, but reality stepped in. My parents' assets were liquidated, their Savannah home was sold, and their Charleston vacation property was seized. After legal fees and debts, the actual recovery came to about $1.1 million. The Victory Drive mansion was restored to my name, and Mercer Real Estate Holdings was dissolved. The home my grandmother loved, the place of my happiest childhood summers, belonged to me again. But 4 years of neglect had left its mark on every corner: peeling paint, an overgrown garden, and a roof that leaked whenever it rained. Fixing what they had let rot would take time and money. The company's shares were more complicated. Grandma Eleanor's 35% stake in Beaumont Realty came back to me, but the business itself had suffered. My father's mismanagement, combined with the scandal, had dragged its value down. Still, it was viable, and it was my grandmother's legacy. Now I had a voice in the company she built. The total recovery neared $2.3 million, less than half of what was stolen. Some scars left by theft are beyond what money can heal. The 4 years of lost professional opportunities, the promotions I never got, and the network I never built. I spent my 20s surviving instead of building, and no settlement could give those years back. But it was enough to start over and build something new. The collapse of my family happened in stages, like a building imploding in slow motion. Father reported to federal prison in March. Before he left, Callahan Holdings declared bankruptcy. Assets were seized and business relationships evaporated. The man who had once threatened to ruin Great Aunt Vivian couldn't even save himself. Mother moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of Savannah. Her old friends stopped returning her calls, and the country club quietly revoked her membership. Vivian told me she told her neighbors she was recovering from an illness, still unable to admit the truth even to strangers. Colleen entered a state women's correctional facility in April. Derek filed for divorce a week after her conviction. He was granted sole custody of Sophie, with Colleen receiving only supervised visitation. Her perfectly curated social media presence went silent, her polished life exposed as an empty performance. Derek moved into a modest house in a different neighborhood. He found a legitimate job, earning his living honestly instead of off stolen wealth. Away from Colleen's shadow, he became the father he had always wanted to be. A year and a week after the Christmas dinner that changed everything, I moved into my grandmother's house. The moving truck held everything I owned from my Atlanta apartment. Unloading didn't take long. 4 years of scraping by hadn't left me with much. Walking through the mansion felt like stepping into a memory. Dust covers masked the furniture, and cobwebs clung to the corners. But beneath the neglect, I could see the beautiful bones of the house. The library where Eleanor read to me, the kitchen where we baked, the garden where she taught me about the flowers. I found her study on the 2nd floor. A small room off the master bedroom that my father had never used. He thought it was too feminine, too much like her. I opened the door and felt her presence instantly. Her writing desk sat by the window, completely untouched. The drawers held papers, letters, and photographs. In the bottom drawer, I found a box marked in her handwriting. For Meredith, when you are ready. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me, all dated, spanning 4 years. One for every month after her death, all unmailed. My hands shook as I realized what I was looking at. These weren't written after she died. That was impossible. The dates extended years into the future. She had written them in advance, preparing a letter for every month of the years she knew she wouldn't see. A grandmother's love reaching across death to guide me through the darkness she knew was coming. I opened the first letter, dated for what should have been my 26th birthday, a year after she passed. "My dearest girl," she wrote, "if you are reading this, I hope you are celebrating. I hope someone is baking you a cake. I hope you are surrounded by people who love you for who you are, not for what you can give them." I couldn't keep reading. The tears came too fast, blurring her script until I could barely see the ink. She knew, she had always known, and she found a way to stay with me even from the grave. I sat in her study, surrounded by her words. I let myself grieve, not for the family I lost, but for the grandmother who loved me enough to leave 4 years of guidance, yet would never see my future. A week later, when Derek brought Sophie to visit, I was ready to rebuild, ready to be the family Sophie deserved, and ready to live up to every word Eleanor had written. Eleanor's letters became my compass. Each one was a guide for a month she knew she wouldn't see, filled with advice she knew I would desperately need. 6 months after moving into the mansion, I finally understood what she wanted me to do with my second chance. The renovation of the house began in February. Contractors came first to fix the roof, then the plumbing, and then the electrical system that hadn't been maintained in years. I was involved in every decision: paint colors, flooring restoration, and restoring the garden. This wasn't just a repair job, it was a tribute to everything Eleanor had built. As we worked, I learned the history of the property. Built in 1892, the mansion was one of the oldest surviving residences on Victory Drive. Eleanor had bought it in 1972, a time when women rarely owned property of that scale on their own. She restored it once after her husband passed away in 1975, pouring her grief into rebuilding when everyone expected her to sell. Now, I was the third generation of women to bring these walls back to life. One of Eleanor's letters, dated 18 months after her passing, contained a passage that changed the direction of my life. "This house has survived wars, storms, and neglect," she wrote, "and so will you. But merely surviving is not enough. You must learn to thrive. Find work that has meaning. Build something that outlasts you." I looked around Savannah and understood what she meant. The city was full of historic buildings sliding into disrepair. Investors would buy them, gut their character, and erase their history just to maximize profit. What if someone protected them instead? What if someone did what Eleanor had done and what I was doing now? Restoring instead of demolishing. Respecting instead of exploiting. The idea took root. In March, I filed the paperwork to start Beaumont Restoration. Named after Eleanor's maiden name, it was the company she never got to build herself. The office was set up in the carriage house behind the mansion, small but functional. The staff consisted of just me and a part-time assistant named Grace, a retired teacher looking for a project. Our mission was simple: acquire neglected historic properties, restore them to their original glory using period-accurate materials and techniques, and sell them to buyers who valued preservation, or rent them at fair prices to families who needed a beautiful home. The first few months were incredibly difficult. Restoration cost more than a standard flip. Authentic materials were expensive, and skilled craftsmen who understood historic building techniques were rare and in high demand. Cash flow was tight despite the settlement money. The Callahan name didn't help. The scandal had been in the local news for months, and some sellers refused to work with me the moment they heard my last name. More than once I watched someone's interest cool down after making the connection. "Aren't you the one whose family was arrested?" I learned to use Eleanor's name instead. "I'm Eleanor Beaumont's granddaughter." That identity opened doors that Meredith Callahan had found closed. Her legacy still held weight in the city, her reputation for integrity and quality untarnished. I borrowed her memory until I could build a reputation of my own. Our first project was a Victorian cottage on Jones Street. It had been abandoned for 7 years and was scheduled for demolition within 60 days. I bought it at auction for $60,000. Everyone said I was crazy. The roof was sagging and the floors were rotted through. Vines had grown through the broken windows, taking over the rooms. 4 months of careful work transformed it completely. We brought back the original heart pine floors that had been hidden under decades of carpet, restored 3 boarded-up fireplaces, and replanted the garden with period-accurate flowers. We installed lighting fixtures salvaged from other historic properties. We listed it for $220,000, and it sold within 2 weeks. The buyers were a young couple expecting their first child. They walked through the finished rooms with tears in their eyes. "It feels like it's always been loved," the wife said. I knew exactly what she meant. James Whitmore visited the finished cottage before the closing. His visits had become more frequent over the months. Professional consultations had slowly turned into dinners, then walks through the historic district, and eventually conversations that had nothing to do with legal matters. "You know," he said, looking around the restored rooms, "most people in your position would have just invested the money, lived off the interest, and taken it easy." "That's not who I am," I told him. "No," he smiled, "it isn't. Eleanor would be very proud. Something changed between us that afternoon. I wasn't ready to name it yet, but I noticed I cared about his smile more than I used to. The online community found me by accident. I joined a forum for people who had been betrayed by their families, a space for survivors of financial exploitation and inheritance theft to share their stories. I posted anonymously at first, using the handle Savannah Survivor. I kept the details basic. Grandmother left me everything. Family forged my signature and stole millions. I fought back and won. The response was unexpected. Within days, there were hundreds of comments. This happened to me too. I thought I was the only one. How did you prove it? Please help me. Direct messages flooded my inbox. People were asking for advice on how to find a lawyer, what evidence to gather, and how to stay strong through massive family pressure without breaking down. I replied to every single one. There was Margaret, a 62-year-old widow in Florida. Her only son had obtained power of attorney when she fell ill, then used it to transfer her retirement accounts into his own name. He sold her car, took her credit cards, and left her living on a Social Security check that barely covered groceries. I don't know what to do, she wrote. He's my son. Over the next few weeks, I walked her through the process. I helped her connect with legal aid in Florida, explained what documents to gather, and stayed up late doing video calls to review evidence, offering encouragement when the fight felt hopeless. 6 months later, she sent a message that made me cry. I got my money back. He's facing charges. I couldn't have done it without you. She told me her daughter had asked where she found the strength, and she'd told her it came from a stranger on the internet who believed in her when her own family didn't. In that moment, I realized my pain had a purpose. My experience could help others find their way out of the same darkness. I wasn't just rebuilding my own life. I was clearing a path for people who were still lost. That summer, Sophie came to stay every other weekend. Derek would drop her off on Saturday morning, sometimes staying for dinner, other times just leaving her with a grateful smile and a promise to pick her up Sunday night. The mansion became her second home. We gardened together. I taught her about Eleanor's flowers, just as my grandmother had taught me, roses, camellias, and jasmine. She claimed a corner of the garden as her own, planting seeds with her small hands and watering them faithfully every visit. We baked in Eleanor's kitchen using the exact recipes my grandmother had shared with me: chocolate chip cookies, peach crisp, and lemon pound cake. Flour would end up on our noses, and laughter filled the rooms that had been quiet for far too long. We read in the library, turning to the same books Eleanor had read to me when I was Sophie's age: Charlotte's Web, Little Women, and The Secret Garden. Sophie would curl up next to me, just as I used to curl up next to Eleanor. The cycle was continuing, despite everything that had tried to break it. One August afternoon, sitting on the porch swing, Sophie asked a question I'd been dreading. "Aunt Meredith, when is Mommy coming home?" I took a deep breath. Colleen's sentence still had 2 years left. Sophie understood a way, but not the reality of prison. "Your mom has to stay where she is for a bit longer," I told her. "She made some mistakes and she has to finish her consequences. But she loves you, and you'll see her again." Sophie was quiet for a long time. "Daddy said you were stronger than Mommy. He said that's why Mommy was mean to you." "People aren't mean because they're strong," I said carefully. "They're mean because they're afraid." "Were you ever afraid?" "For a long time I was terrified." "You don't look scared now." I pulled her closer. "I'm not, because I found people worth being brave for." December arrived. It was our first real Christmas in the restored mansion. The guest list included Great Aunt Vivian, bringing her famous pecan pie. Derek and Sophie arrived with a wrapped gift she'd made herself. James came early to help set things up, alongside Grace from the office and the Hendersons from next door, an elderly couple who had known Eleanor for 40 years. Dinner wasn't perfect. I overcooked the turkey slightly, and the mashed potatoes were a bit lumpy, but nobody cared. Sophie insisted on making a toast. Standing on her chair and holding her apple juice high like a glass of fine wine, she said something that brought a complete hush to the room. "I'm thankful for everyone here, for great-grandma Eleanor watching us from heaven, and for Aunt Meredith who never gave up." Her eyes found mine. "You're the bravest person I know." I couldn't speak. My throat tightened and my eyes welled with tears. Finally, I managed a few words. "You're the ones who make me want to be brave. All of you." I raised my glass to Eleanor and to everyone who had become family. The table responded in unison. "To family." Under the table, James found my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. For the first time in 3 years, Christmas felt like what it was supposed to be. It felt like home, hope, and the beginning of something good. Eleanor had told me to let myself be happy. But some people view your happiness as an invitation to return. 6 months after that real Christmas, my mother decided she wanted back into my life. The attempts started small. A card in February, strangely a sympathy card, but the note inside was in her handwriting. Thinking of you, missing you, Mom. There was no return address. It was forwarded through someone I didn't know. I didn't reply. I threw it directly into the trash. The second attempt came through Great Aunt Vivian. Patricia had called her crying, begging her to mediate. "Please get Meredith to talk to me. I'm her mother." Vivian recounted the conversation reluctantly. "I told her it wasn't my place," she said, but she was persistent. Her expression told me Patricia had tried the emotional manipulation there too, using guilt about family duty to pressure my aunt into being a messenger. The third attempt used a woman from the church I'd attended as a child. She called to check in, her voice warm and concerned, but the topic shifted quickly. "Your mother is just heartbroken, Meredith. She's not well. Don't you think life is too short to hold on to grudges?" I recognized the script Patricia had always used, using others to deliver her message, creating pressure from multiple directions to make me feel surrounded. The fourth time was flowers, a massive arrangement of lilies and roses delivered to the mansion. The card read, "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. Please, Meredith." The flowers were beautiful. I donated them to a local nursing home that afternoon. Each attempt disrupted my peace. I'd built something beautiful and real, and now the familiar shadow was creeping around the edges. It wasn't anger exactly, but a deep exhaustion at the predictability of it all. Then the letter came. Someone dropped it off on the porch. There was no stamp. Patricia couldn't come herself because of her probation restrictions, but she'd found a way. 8 pages of her neat, precise script, the kind of letter that attempts to overwhelm you with sheer length. I sat at Eleanor's desk to read it, my coffee growing cold beside me. The opening set her up as the one taking a brave risk. "My dearest Meredith, I don't know if you'll read this. I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, but I had to try. You are my daughter, and that has to mean something." The apology portion used carefully managed language. "I know we hurt you. I know we made terrible choices." Notice the "we" spreading the blame, softening her personal role. "We thought we were protecting you. We were wrong." After everything, 2 years later, she was still using the narrative of protection. She still couldn't write the words I stole from you. The grievance part detailed how hard her life had become. The small apartment, the lost friends, her failing health, Victor in prison, rarely writing, Colleen refusing to see her during visiting hours. "I've lost everything, Meredith. Everything but the hope that you might find it in your heart to forgive me." The perfect victim narrative. The change section claimed a transformation. "I've been in therapy. I understand now why I did what I did. My own childhood, my fear of money." It stuck to surface-level psychological explanations, avoiding actual accountability. "I've changed, Meredith. I am not the same person." But there was no specifics on what had changed. No acknowledgement of the career-destroying emails. No recognition of the scale of what she'd taken from me. The ending used Eleanor as leverage. "I'm not asking for things to go back to the way they were. I just want a chance. A coffee, a phone call, anything. Life is short, and your grandmother would have wanted us to reconcile." Using my dead grandmother, the woman they'd robbed and manipulated in her final days, as a tool to manipulate me. The sheer nerve of it took my breath away. I read the letter twice, looking for anything real, a genuine admission, a specific apology, true accountability. I found nothing but the old patterns wrapped in the language of therapy. Patricia had learned new words, but she hadn't learned new behavior. Late that night I sat and remembered the things I usually keep buried. There had been good moments. Patricia braiding my hair before school when I was 8, a birthday cake with chocolate frosting and pink flowers when I was 10. My mother defending me to an unfair teacher when I was 12. Those moments existed. They were real, but they were islands in a completely different ocean. The constant comparisons to Colleen. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" The criticism disguised as care. "I'm only saying this because I love you." The moments where my achievements were minimized. "That's nice, but Colleen made the dean's list." The moments where my failures were amplified. "I knew you'd let us down." And then there were the years of deliberate destruction. The anonymous emails Patricia had helped write. She has a history of theft within her own family. Every rejected job application, every closed door, my own mother's hand involved in my ruin. I understood the pattern now. The good moments were real, but they were just enough warmth to maintain attachment, combined with just enough cruelty to maintain control. That's the cycle of toxic love, giving you just enough to keep you hoping, then taking everything else away. Eleanor's letter had warned me. Patricia acts out of cruelty disguised as concern. My grandmother had seen it decades ago. I was the last to understand, but I understood it now. Late that night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an Instagram message request from an account with no profile picture. The preview showed enough. "You think you won?" I opened it, knowing exactly who it was from. Colleen's message was the exact opposite of Mother's letter. There was no pretense of reconciliation, no performance of change. "You think you won, don't you? I'm in here because of you. Because you couldn't just let things go. We were a family, and family handles things privately. But you had to make a scene. You had to humiliate us. Mom cries every night. Dad is sick, and you're living in Grandma's house acting like you earned it. You didn't earn anything. You just got lucky and got your revenge." The message ended with a threat. "When I get out, I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. No apology, no acknowledgement of the forgery, the theft, or the sabotage." In Colleen's mind, she was the victim, and I was the villain for exposing the truth. I looked at the two communications side by side. Patricia's letter used the language of therapy, appealing to family bonds. Colleen's message was blunt and threatening. The same family, the same denial, just different packaging. If Patricia had truly changed, she would have addressed Colleen's behavior. She would have acknowledged that her oldest daughter was still threatening me. Instead, she was probably making excuses for her, defending her. The family system was still completely intact. Victor blamed circumstances, Patricia played the victim, and Colleen attacked the whistleblower. Nobody had actually changed, they had just run out of power. I understood what forgiveness would mean here. It wouldn't mean peace, it would mean exposure. It wouldn't mean healing, it would mean reopening the wounds. It wouldn't mean family, it would mean drama. If I agreed, I was asking to be heard again by people who still believed they had a right to hurt me. The next morning, I sat at Eleanor's desk and wrote my reply. I didn't list grievances. I didn't explain my pain. I didn't leave a door open. "Patricia," I began, "I'm using your name because Mom implies a relationship we don't have. I received your letter and read it carefully. I found an apology with no substance, change with no evidence, and a request with no acknowledgement of what you took from me. You didn't just steal money. You stole 4 years of my career, my confidence, and my ability to trust. You were the thief, yet you helped write emails calling me one. Colleen messaged me last night. Threats, blame, and zero remorse. That is your family. That is what you raised. I don't hate you. Hate takes energy, and I choose to spend mine elsewhere. But I don't forgive you either. Not out of bitterness, but because forgiveness requires repentance, and you are still performing. Do not contact me again. Do not use others to reach out. Do not come to my home. If you cross these boundaries, I will seek legal options. This is non-negotiable. Goodbye." I signed just my name, not your daughter, just Meredith. That afternoon, I took both letters out to the garden, to the fire pit Eleanor used for burning autumn leaves. I struck a match and watched the 8 pages of manipulation curl and turn black. Then Colleen's printed message joined the flames. The smoke rose and disappeared. I didn't feel a loss because I realized I had already let go a long time ago. This was just making it visible. I called James that evening. "I made my decision," I told him. "The boundary is set, permanently." I wrote her a final letter. There was a pause on the line. Then he asked, "How do you feel?" I thought about it. Like I just locked a door that should have been shut years ago. "That's not cold, Meredith, that's healthy." "I know," I said. "I finally know. Forgiveness, I understand it now, doesn't require reconciliation. It means releasing them from my mind, choosing peace over their drama, and refusing to keep auditioning for their love. I forgave them for myself, not for them, and forgiving them doesn't mean I have to see them again. The boundaries gave me something I'd never had, room to grow into the person I was meant to be. A year after I burned my mother's letter, and 3 years after the Christmas Eve that changed everything, I stood in Eleanor's garden and finally understood the lesson she had been trying to teach me. A December frost covered the ground. The morning sun broke through the Spanish moss, casting a golden light over the restored property. The mansion on Victory Drive was alive again. The shutters had fresh paint, the railings on the wraparound porch were repaired, and the windows gleamed in the winter sun. A brass plaque beside the front door read, "The Beaumont House, built 1892, restored 2024. 3 years of hard work had transformed more than just the building. Beaumont Restoration now employed 8 people full-time. We had completed the restoration of 12 historic homes across Savannah, and a local magazine featured us in their autumn issue under the headline, "Preserving the Past, Building the Future." The waiting list for properties stretched months in advance. More work than I could handle, a beautiful problem to have. The settlement money had been invested wisely, and the profits from the business were poured back into new projects. By the Callahan family standards, I wasn't wealthy, but I was free, truly, completely free. Money I earned myself, not stolen wealth. Success I built, not inherited through theft. That morning, I walked through the mansion, touching the walls that had witnessed 3 generations of women fighting to survive. Eleanor's study had become my home office, still decorated with her photos, her books, and her gifts. The box that held her letters sat on the shelf, now almost empty. There was only one envelope left. I'd saved it for today. Today, 3 years after everything changed. The guests began to arrive in the late afternoon. Great Aunt Vivian came first, carrying her famous pecan pie, a smile on her face that had grown lighter over the years. She'd moved into the carriage house 6 months ago, claiming her old place was too big for an old woman. Now, we ate dinner together most nights, 2 survivors healing side by side. Derek arrived with Sophie and his new wife, Sarah. Sarah was a kindergarten teacher, and they'd married in October. Sophie was 10 now, taller and more confident, but she still possessed those bright eyes that saw the world with complete clarity. Sophie ran straight to me the moment she crossed the threshold. "Aunt Meredith, I made you something." It was a handmade ornament, a slightly lopsided model of the mansion made from felt and glitter. It was perfect. The ornaments she had given me over the last 3 years now hung proudly on my Christmas tree, each one a milestone of healing. Away from Colleen's shadow, Derek had become the father he always wanted to be. At his wedding, he pulled me aside. "Thank you," he said. "You freed all of us, not just yourself." At that wedding, Sophie had asked if I would ever get married. I laughed, glancing across the room to where James Whitmore was watching me with a warm, steady gaze. "Maybe, sweetheart, when the time is right." James arrived early, as always, to help prep. He moved through the mansion like he belonged there. Because he did. What started as a professional relationship had grown into a friendship, and then into something deeper that neither of us was in a rush to label. Our first official date was 8 months ago. He had shown up with flowers from Eleanor's favorite florist without any prompting. I knew right then. Grace from the office arrived with her husband, followed by the Hendersons, the neighbors who had known Eleanor for 40 years. Mrs. Henderson gave me her usual gentle smile. "She would be so incredibly proud of you, dear." I believed her. Before dinner, I slipped back into Eleanor's study. One final envelope remained in the box, dated for this exact month, this very Christmas. 3 years after her passing. My hands were steady as I broke the seal. I had done this many times before, but knowing it was the last one made the moment heavy. After this, there would be no more new words from my grandmother. Only memories and legacy. "My dearest Meredith," she wrote, "if you've waited until now to read this, you've shown a patience I never quite managed." 3 years. That is the time I estimated it would take for the truth to surface, for the battle to be fought, and for you to build something new from the ashes. If I've guessed correctly, you are no longer the frightened girl who watched me die. You have become the woman I always knew you could be. I had to pause. Her voice, reaching across time, still knew me better than I knew myself. "I am so sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive," the letter continued. "I tried to leave you tools, the money, the house, these letters. But the most important thing I left you already existed inside you. I just helped you find it. You were never weak, Meredith. You were just buried. There is a difference." The next section held the wisdom it had taken her a lifetime to acquire. "By now you have learned what took me decades to understand. Family is not blood, it is choice. Home is not a building, it is the people who stay. Forgiveness is not weakness. Boundaries are not cruel, and justice, real justice, is not revenge. It is living well. It is thriving in front of the very people who wanted you to fail." The final paragraphs blurred through my tears. "This is my last letter. But it is not the end of my presence in your life. Every time you restore a house, I am there. Every time you help someone fight for what belongs to them, I am there. Every time you choose love over fear, I am there. You carry me forward, Meredith. That is what legacy means. Now put this down and go live. I have given you all my words. The rest of the story is yours to write. Make it a good one. All my love, across time and death and everything in between. Your grandmother, Eleanor. I pressed the letter tightly to my chest. Her final words, her final gift. But not truly the end. Eleanor lived on in everything I was building. Dinner that night was a universe away from the Christmas 3 years ago. That night had been filled with accusations, police officers, and handcuffs. Tonight was filled with laughter, warmth, and belonging. Same season, same holiday, completely different world. The table was surrounded by people who had earned their place there. Vivian shared stories of Eleanor's youth. Derek and Sarah held hands while Sophie showed off her latest dance moves. James kept the glasses full, making sure everyone was comfortable. Grace and her husband debated local politics, and the Hendersons reminisced about the neighborhood's history. Sophie insisted on making a toast for the 3rd year in a row. She stood on her chair, raising her apple juice high. I'm thankful for everyone here, for great-grandma Eleanor watching us from heaven, and for Aunt Meredith who never gave up. Her eyes locked onto mine. You're the bravest person I know. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and my eyes welled with tears. Finally, I managed to break the silence. You're the ones who make me want to be brave. All of you. I raised my glass to Eleanor and to everyone who had become family. The table responded in unison, to family. Under the table, James found my hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. This was what safety felt like. This was what love was supposed to be. After the guests left, I stood alone in Eleanor's garden. The holiday lights twinkled in the dark. I thought about everything that had brought me to this point. The 4 years of theft, the 3 years of rebuilding, the girl I used to be, and the woman I was now, the family I lost, and the family I found. The lessons had crystallized into truths I would carry forever. Blood guarantees nothing. Character defines worth. Simply surviving isn't enough. Thriving is the real victory. Forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, and boundaries protect your peace. Justice isn't revenge. It's refusing to let them win. And family isn't decided at birth. It's the people who show up and stay. The people who hurt me thought I would break. Instead, I built a life they could never touch. James joined me on the porch, handing me a cup of coffee. We sat in comfortable silence. You okay? Better than okay. He smiled. Eleanor would be proud of you. I know. I looked out at the garden she planted, the house she built, and the life she wanted for me. If you are listening to this story, really listening, maybe you recognize a piece of it. Maybe you've been accused by the very people who were supposed to protect you. Maybe you've had things stolen from you, your money, your time, your opportunities, or your dignity. Maybe you're wondering if you have the strength to fight back. Take it from someone who has been there. You do. Not because you are extraordinary, but because you are human, and humans survive. We adapt, we rebuild. But we can't do it entirely alone. I had Eleanor's letters, I had James, I had Vivian, Derek, and Sophie, and I had strangers online who believed in me when no one else would. Now, if you've made it this far, you have me. My story is proof that it can get better. I want to hear your story. Not out of curiosity, but because you need to speak it into existence. Leave a comment below. Tell me where you're from, what you've survived, or what you're still fighting for. Every story matters, and every voice deserves to be heard. I spent 4 years thinking I was completely isolated. I wasn't, and neither are you. If this story helped you, if it gave you hope, courage, or just a reminder that justice is real, please hit the like button. Not for me, but for the algorithm, so the system knows that stories like ours matter, and that voices like ours deserve to be heard. If you want to hear more stories about regular people standing up against impossible odds, subscribe and turn on notifications. There are more stories on the way, and more people who refuse to stay silent. Every single one of them deserves a witness. James once asked me what Eleanor's final letter said. Make it a good story, I told him. He smiled. Did you? I thought back to that Christmas 3 years ago, the accusations, the fear, and the exact second I decided to stop being a victim. I thought of everyone who tried to tear me down, and everyone who helped me stand back up. I looked at the mansion behind me, the man beside me, and the future finally opening up ahead. Yes, I said, I think I did. And somewhere out there I could swear Eleanor was smiling. This story is fictionalized for dramatic effect.